Hi everyone, and welcome to English for You. I'm Pat.
And I'm Mike.
Yes, that's right.
I am.
Today we're taking a look at a famous historical figure. Before we reveal who it is and what that person has done, who are some historical figures that you are either currently or have been kind of curious to learn more about?
Gosh, that is a good question. Well, not too long ago, I read a very interesting book about a man named Escoffier, who was probably the first great chef in Europe. And I thought that was kind of interesting because I'd seen his name, I'd heard around, but I didn't really know who he was, where he worked, and what he did. And if you've seen any of those shows where they show restaurants and they have people cooking the meat here and making the cakes there and preparing the salads, and it's all kind of organized like a very special team, that was this guy. He was the guy who invented the brigade system in kitchens with the chef and the sort of assistant and the sous chef and things like that. And I also learned something very interesting and probably more useful in my life. He also cooked scrambled eggs in a way that made the most famous actress of the time, imagine like, I don't know, Julia Roberts or something like that, she only stayed at his hotels because of the way he made scrambled eggs.
Wow.
Do you want the secret?
I do.
Take a clove of garlic, put it on a fork, and use that to scramble your eggs. You get a nice garlic flavor. Don't actually leave it in. You can take it out. It'll get soft. It'll spread a mild garlic flavor. And apparently this movie star, she was nuts. She was crazy for these scrambled eggs. And if he was cooking in Geneva, she would go there. In Paris, she would follow him.
Wow.
So I kind of thought that was cool too. Because I'll never own a restaurant. I'll never be a chef. But I can always make my scrambled eggs like Escoffier.
Cool.
There you go.
Well, who are we going to be learning about today? Let's read through day one of our article and find out.
Reading.
Florence Nightingale, the lady with the lamp. The importance of sanitation cannot be exaggerated. Though this might sound obvious to somebody living in the 21st century, health problems related to hygiene weren't completely understood until relatively recently. One 19th century nurse, however, knew just how important it was to combine healthcare and hygiene. Florence Nightingale was born to a rich British family in 1820. From a young age, Florence knew she wanted to help people. Her parents had different ideas for her, though. In the 19th century, it was common for girls to marry young. Florence rejected a marriage proposal arranged by her parents and started training as a nurse instead. Nursing wasn't a well-respected career then, but Florence was very good at it and quickly built a reputation. In 1853, a terrible war began in Crimea. Florence took a team of nurses to a field hospital and began treating hurt soldiers. She discovered the soldiers living in terrible conditions, which made it difficult for her to treat them. Florence ordered that the hospital be scrubbed clean, and the number of deaths immediately began to decrease. She would often hold an oil lamp and patrol the hospital at night to check on the soldiers. People started calling her the lady with the lamp.
So the article doesn't start by introducing the person, but it does talk about the contribution she helped make. It says, the importance of sanitation cannot be exaggerated. So this is another way of saying sanitation is extremely, extremely, extremely important.
It is.
But what is sanitation? Well, it's keeping things clean for the good of public health. When we talk about sanitation, we're not so much talking about washing our hands and clothes. It's more about large public kind of things. Clean water supplies for a city, removing the trash, keeping the sewers working. And in hospitals, that means the sort of big activities of waste disposal, disposal and overall building, cleaning, and that sort of stuff.
All the things that we used to just throw in the river back in the old days, we can't do that anymore. We need more complicated solutions for sanitation. And yes, it's hard to exaggerate how important sanitation is. When you exaggerate, this verb means you kind of stretch the truth. You make things sound bigger or more important or better than they actually are. You might exaggerate when you're telling a joke because it just makes it a bit funnier. If you're writing a novel, you might exaggerate the drama of the people. If you watch a movie and you see people crying whenever anything sort of upsetting happens, you might, oh, they're exaggerating. I don't do that. People don't do that. We don't stretch the truth, but sometimes it can help to get your idea across. It can be entertaining. It can give people an emotional reaction. And also it can be a mild form of lying, possibly, if people don't know you're exaggerating, like my grandfather or your grandfather. I think this is our example sentence. I think your grandfather was exaggerating when he said that the fish he caught was bigger than a city bus.
Yeah,
I think he was exaggerating.
A little tall, that tale.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's true.
So yes, sanitation is important. And as the article says, though this might sound obvious to somebody living in the 21st century, health problems related to hygiene weren't completely understood until relatively recently. Yeah, people didn't realize that it was germs and dirt that made things worse. They thought it was bad air or problems of another sort, something that isn't explainable by science.
Sin.
Yes, exactly. You've got a bad character. No wonder you get sick.
There you go.
But what is hygiene? Let's take a look at that word. So hygiene is not too different from the idea of sanitation. It can often be a little more personal. But the idea of hygiene is keeping clean specifically for the purpose of preventing diseases. So that means washing your hands before you touch food, making sure the surfaces and the tools you use when preparing food are clean. That kind of stuff. Keeping your home and area and body clean so you don't get sick from stuff. So people have only kind of got this idea relatively recently.
That's right. When we say relatively, we're kind of talking about when we compare it to other things. Knowing about something that happened relatively recently, and then we find out it happened 100 or 150 years ago, you might go, well, that's a long time. But compared to how long humans have been living together, 5, 6, 7,000 years, well, relatively 100 or 150 years isn't too long. So we do this to kind of compare things that might seem like a big number. For example, it's 28 degrees in Canada in the summer. That's pretty warm, but relatively compared to Taiwan, where it can be like 38 degrees, it's not that hot. So we use it to show there's a comparison that needs to be made to really understand the numbers or what we're talking about. Here's an example. Compared to a Tesla, a Toyota is a relatively cheap car, but cars are always expensive.
That's true.
Yes.
Okay, so yes, people in the past didn't really understand hygiene and sanitation. But not everybody was making that mistake. We see one 19th century nurse, however, knew just how important it was to combine healthcare and hygiene. So she understood the relationship between, dirt and things not being clean or washed and people getting sick.
There you go. And who was this person? Well, we meet her in the next sentence. Florence Nightingale was born to a rich British family in 1820. So as a young woman, as a young member of a rich family, she didn't really need to work at all.
Certainly not.
She kind of lived on her family's money, but she wanted to help.
Yeah, from a young age, the article says, Florence knew she wanted to help people.
Good for her. But of course, working women back in 1820, especially if you were rich, that was very unusual. Her parents had different ideas for her, though. Marry a nice young gentleman and live in the country and have lots of kids, but not work.
Yes. As we see, in the 19th century, it was common for girls to marry young. Yeah, before they were 20, for sure.
Absolutely. Florence rejected a marriage proposal arranged by her parents and started training as a nurse instead. She must have been very strong to listen to her parents say, oh, this man's so nice, he wants to marry you, you'll be such a good mother. She's like, nope, 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 I want to be a nurse. So she rejected this marriage proposal or proposal of marriage. A proposal is basically when you have an idea and you put it out there and you ask what people think of it. Do they like your idea? Do they not? When we talk about proposal in terms of a romantic relationship, like boyfriends and girlfriends getting married, that is when the man usually will get down on a knee and ask the woman usually to marry him. And they'll have the ring and they'll be engaged after this. But the actual act of saying, would you like to marry me? That's a proposal. And when someone says, oh, there was a proposal at the restaurant last night, someone asks someone to marry them. And the verb, of course, would be to propose. When you propose, you ask your partner to marry you and make you the happiest person in the world.
Yep, so Florence Nightingale decided to train as a nurse. So this isn't just she's going to work, because some women may have worked as like teachers of music, nannies, looking after other rich people's kids.
Governess,
Yep. But not nursing. As we see, nursing wasn't a well-respected career then. But Florence was very good at it and quickly built a reputation. So the word career can mean your working life and all the different jobs you might do. Usually we're talking about the main thing. Your career as an actor might last a certain time. You might have several careers in your life if you change jobs. We can also use the word career to mean a particular job. Okay, so a lawyer is a career. Becoming a doctor is a kind of career, that kind of thing. So it's got sort of two meanings. So we could say Dennis had a 40-year career as a hotel manager, or we could say something like being a hotel manager is a difficult and busy career. Okay, so Florence had chosen this career for herself of a nurse, and she built her reputation as being very good at it.
She did indeed. Let's find out more about that word, reputation. And this word reputation is basically what we use to describe what people think of something. People in the public, people out there in the streets, not necessarily people you know or your family, but all people. What do people generally think of this thing? Probably from what they've heard from friends, what they've read on the internet or seen on the news. It might not always be accurate. It might not always be true to the facts, but it's generally what people think about this. If I say, oh, my brother is a professional athlete, most people will go, oh, he's probably rich, because athletes have a reputation for making a lot of money, right? We think of famous basketball players or soccer players. But of course, the reputation of professional athletes can be different. There are people who play sports as a job, but they don't make a lot of money. So sometimes the reputation and the facts are a little bit different, but generally the reputation is what people think of a certain thing. For example, Tokyo has a reputation for being really expensive, but it's actually not that bad.
So there was one particular time and place that Florence Nightingale's career really kind of became important. Her reputation really grew. So let's find out about it. The article says in 1853, a terrible war began in Crimea. Now, this Crimea has been on the news a lot more in the last few years. It's it's not quite an island, but it's an area of land just south of Ukraine that's been fought over by Ukraine and Russia in recent times and by various countries in the past.
That's right. It's definitely in the news now. They had a war back in 1853 and people are still fighting over it now. Very sad. But let's find out about the Crimean War in 1853. Florence, that's Florence Nightingale, took a team of nurses to a field hospital and began treating hurt soldiers. You might imagine that the army was bringing these nurses and giving them everything they need and places to work, but I think a lot of the men who ran the army back then, they were not really keen on this idea. They weren't really happy to have a bunch of these women nurses running around, but the soldiers who were hurt, they were very happy the nurses were there.
Yeah, and why was that? Well, we read, she discovered the soldiers living in terrible conditions, which made it difficult for her to treat them. So again, this idea we talked about at the start, the dirt, the mess, things not being clean. Now that sentence includes today's language in focus, so let's take a look at that right now. So the sentence pattern we're looking at is make it followed by an adjective for somebody to do something. And this shows how a particular condition changes a situation in some way, often making it easier or harder for a person to accomplish a particular goal. Now, in this sentence, the it doesn't actually stand for anything. It's a dummy pronoun that's used to make the sentence complete. But you say this could make it easier for somebody. This could make it difficult for somebody to do something. Easy and hard are two of the words that feature quite commonly in this sentence pattern. For example, this method makes it easier for people to solve hard math problems. If they use the method, they'll find their job of solving the problems easier. So the idea here is this field hospital, which by the way is not an actual hospital. It's more like a big tent in the middle of a field where sick soldiers would be put. So this place was dirty. The instruments, the beds were not clean, the things on the beds, there was stuff just piled in corners. People weren't taking away like the blood or whatever, the food probably wasn't that healthy. And because of all of this, Florence and her nursing team, they couldn't save people's lives. They couldn't treat them and make their diseases better. It made it hard for them to do their work.
Absolutely. If we saw a hospital from then, to us it would look like a barn on a farm where they keep animals, not the clean place we would expect. But Florence Nightingale, she had this idea that having people, if they're sick, in a clean place can only be good for their health. So she started to clean it up. It says Florence ordered that the hospital be scrubbed clean, and the number of deaths immediately began to decrease, so people wouldn't be dying of infections and things like that because they scrubbed it super clean. When you scrub something, you seem to be wanting that thing clean because you are washing it with a lot of energy and a lot of force. You're not just sort of gently rubbing the soap on your hand. You're rubbing your hands together. Maybe you're using a sponge or something rough to kind of get that dirt that's really stuck on. So when you scrub something, it's obviously very dirty and you're using a lot of energy and power to get it as clean as possible because it needs it. For example, Elmo scrubbed his shirt to try to get the grape juice stain out of it. Grape juice is hard to get out of a shirt. You have to scrub it sometimes.
Okay, and this worked, making this field hospital a lot cleaner, stopped people dying. And it wasn't just a slow change that people are like, well, how do you know that that's what worked? No, this happened immediately. If something happens immediately, it happens right away. We could say immediate as the adjective form. It's an immediate change. It doesn't take a long time. It's very sudden. Okay, what you could say, for example, when Jessica saw the traffic accident, she immediately took out her phone and dialed 119. She didn't wait and look for a while. She didn't keep walking or finish what she was doing. No, as soon as she saw it, boom, out came the phone. She started dialing. There was no delay at all.
That's right. And once the hospital was cleaner and a nicer place to be, Florence Nightingale stuck around to make sure the soldiers were comfortable. It says she would often hold an oil lamp and patrol the hospital at night to check on the soldiers. And just having her there, having her kind face and her gentle touch was often enough to keep many of these soldiers from giving up and dying and stuff. And she would walk around at night. When you walk around to kind of check that a certain area is safe, nothing bad is happening, no crimes are happening, no fires have broken out, especially if it's at night or something when people aren't around, you could use the verb to patrol. That's what security guards might do around a big building. The police, as they drive their car slowly around the neighborhood, just kind of looking for anything that they can help with or any trouble. They are patrolling. They're not expecting to find something. They're just out there moving around to make sure nothing in the area goes wrong or has a problem.
Yeah, you can use the phrase they are on patrol to say that's what they're doing. Sure. And a group of people doing that job can be called a patrol.
Oh, okay.
They're going around a particular area. And they're doing that to check on things or people. If you're checking on someone or something, you're just making sure it's okay, that the condition it's in is good. It's not changing and getting for the worse. nothing is needed to be done to sort of make this thing get better again. So you might go, okay, I'm just going to check on the kids. And you go, yep, they're fine. They're playing. They're not fighting. No one's fallen over. Nobody's starting a fire. Okay, I've just checked on them. They are okay. Maybe you're cooking something and you go, open the oven, check on it. Yep, all is going well. Nothing's burning. That sort of thing.
There you go. And the Crimean War was one of the first wars to actually be reported in the daily newspaper just a few days after things happened. One of the first sort of modern wars where people could read what happened yesterday. And as news of the war spread, news of Florence Nightingale also started to come back to the newspapers and people in London and other places. And then we read, people started calling her the Lady with the Lamp. This sort of angel-like figure that walked around taking care of the wounded soldiers, making sure that they were comfortable even in the middle of a big war.
In fact, people will still call nurses kind of like Florence Nightingales or because of the effect she had. Now, we'll learn a bit more about these subjects in tomorrow's lesson, but right now, let's go to our For You Chat question.
For You Chat.
So our chat question is, the world has changed a lot in the last 200 years, of course, particularly for women. How is life in the 21st century different for women compared to the 19th century?
Wow, that's a great question. And we could talk for hours and write many books about it. But I would basically just say women today have many more choices than women in the 19th century. As we read, even for girls from rich families, getting married and having kids and being a housewife, that was kind of the only thing you could look forward to doing. I mean, there were some poorer women who did things even, 800 years ago, poor women were making beer in certain parts of the world or working on farms and maybe doing a few things at home like knitting. But to have a career, to go to school, to make choices about having family or not having family, all of those things were beyond most women. So even in the last 100 years, these kinds of choices have become much more easy for women to make. They're much more free to make them. And that's something that women for, well, all time until recently didn't have as options.
Yep, more independence. Women have got the vote in the last kind of, 100, 120 odd years.
The power to make their own choices.
Exactly. Sadly, this isn't the case in every country around the world, but hopefully things will move continually in that direction. But that's all the time we've got for today. Join us again tomorrow for more of this article. See you then. Bye for now.
Take care.
Vocabulary Review.
Exaggerate. Susan exaggerated the pain in her leg because she wanted her boyfriend to feel sorry for her. Relatively. This exam is relatively easy to pass. You don't need to do much except learn a few words. Career. Being a doctor is a respected career, so many parents would love their kids to have this job. Reputation. My favorite restaurant has a reputation for excellent customer service. Scrub. Sarah scrubbed the toilet for a long time, but she couldn't get it clean. Immediately. If you want to catch your train, you have to leave immediately.
智慧小补帖
Sanitation. Hygiene. Proposal. Patrol.
以上节目是由活用空中美语制作，活用空中美语杂志，请洽询全国各大书店。如欲索取试听教材，请来电02-2364-4000 02-2364-4000，或上网查询，网址是 www.english4u.net www.english4u.net